Good morning, everybody. Hey, Michael. Good to see you here, man. Um, let's get transitioned over, and everything looks to be good. All right. You guys may have just seen. I had some problems with the um grading to migrate the upgrade migration to NX version 21.2. Um, some things that you can do, especially if you're using NX, is like I went through these migrations, and I removed one of them because we'd already done it before and it crashed before. So we removed it, and everything seems to be fine. This last one, the module resolution, I'm not sure what was going on with this one. It couldn't figure it out for whatever reason. But I just went and read about it. Basically, we look at tsconfig base. We changed our module resolution to bundler, and this was something that they were going to do for us, but it didn't work. So, from their site, basically that means that we don't have to include extensions on our bundles. Um, is what it gives various things for if we're building node bundles for that. So it has been a while. I'm doing well. Last week was Father's Day here in the U.S. So I took the day to spend some time with my family, um, and we're back and taking a look at just different things with our tour of heroes. Had a really good Father's Day. Have a great family. They So Father's Day is typically a day where you get like a special meal. So um, my wife and daughters prepared steak with a chimichurri sauce that was really good, um, and then some homemade steak fries, um, which I don't know if you're not familiar with them. They're thicker fries or chips depending on the part of the world that you're from, right? And they were really good. It was a great. Oh, and there was it's the time of year when fresh corn on the cob is also a thing. Um, really like I really like corn on the cob, so it was a great it was a great dinner. I had a lot of fun with my family. So yeah, that's why we missed last week. I don't know. That's kind of the update going on. I mean, other than that, it's summertime here. Um, Northern Hemisphere, right? So summer vacation. My girls are out of school. Um, One of them is on a humanitarian trip right now, building schools in a part of the country, or in a part of the country, part of the world. She's way outside of the country right now. Um, and we're really excited about her. We're watching the updates from her trip and things like that. And she's having a good time. Just being with other kids her age, helping to build schools. So I don't want to give too much information about it until she's home safely. So, but she is out helping to build schools in another part of the world, and she'll be home. She'll be home around 4th of July, actually. So another big holiday in the U.S., right? So yeah, uh, kind of the updates. Um, one nice thing about I guess taking the train into the office is I get plenty of time to read, um, which allows me to think about things and um, just plan stuff out and catch up on reading that I haven't done. Um, so uh, yeah, it's an hour train ride into downtown Salt Lake and an hour train ride home. So um, on the weeks that I'm traveling to work, I have 2 hours on the train. Luckily, there's Wi-Fi, so that's all good. Other update. Oh, let's see. There's the Angular language service. I did switch over from Copilot to Gemini Code Assist. Um, so we'll see how that goes. I've been I've been using Code Assist for a little bit. It seems to be better with Angular on well, it seems to be a lot better with Angular than Copilot was. Um, so we'll see how that goes. Unfortunately, we're in the middle of updating. I was hoping to get all of this stuff done before for the stream. We got stuck in the NX migration. I do want to get the Angular CLI stuff upgraded. That should be fairly quick. Yes, lint. Yeah, we'll upgrade this stuff. Like the types for Express, this stuff's fine. The types are all fine. I don't want to mess with the Playwright plugin or Express or Jest. So we'll leave all this stuff alone for now. But we will get the Angular stuff done, right? So pnpm exec nx migrate Angular CLI. While that's going, let's get this other stuff staged. So upgraded NX. I'm hoping one of these NX upgrades fixes the terminal for Windows, because that would be awesome. Angular Docs just added a page on a big prompt for how Cursor Copilot Judy handles best practices. Actually, not Copilot, but Firebase Studio. Yeah. Yeah, that I was looking at this stuff too. And this is really cool. So, if you guys are using your own LLMs or stuff like that, you can use your context, right? And I was reading through this, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in here, right? That's not the one I wanted. So here's the LLMs.txt. But using this, the agents are able to find a whole bunch of information about your prompts. But there were some fun prompts in here, telling it to use to use standalone instead of modules and stuff like that. So hey, Abrador, it's good to see you, man. Welcome to the stream. Anyways, yeah, they spent a ton of time just helping with LLMs, and you can get into this stuff, and you can add this as extensions, either like as a RAG document or other ways that you can add context to your LLM, and make your LLM more Angular aware. I believe that the LLM I'm using right now for Copilot, not Copilot, Angular Code Gen, I believe it is it uses that stuff already. So we updated the CLI. Now we want to do exec nx migrate at Angular core. We want to upgrade our core. Is a code gen Junie in so I can use Junie. I do have Junie. So here's Junie, and we used Junie before. I have Code Assist turned on, and we can try Code Assist also. Um, and see how that goes. Um, so um, we'll definitely be using. I I was just asked. Well, I wasn't just asked. The NG Asia asked me to present the same talk that I gave for the Angular community meetup, um, and I believe I'm presenting that on July 9th. I should probably verify that, right? Um, let's go to month view. Yeah, week view's fine. No, when did I agree to do that? Week after? I'm gonna have to go find when I agreed to do that. I think it's on July 9th that I agreed to do it. Um, I've got a couple of weeks. Um, but yeah, we're gonna be doing um we're gonna be doing another dry run of that talk, I think, and I want to update some stuff about it. So um, that week we're definitely going to spend some time going over and preparing for that presentation. Um, so I'm looking forward to that. Um, I think I added it to my work calendar, um, so it'll probably be in my phone, to be honest. I take a look. Um, Take a look at July. Hmm. I don't know when I agreed to do it. That's something I should figure out. um, why use Angular when you can use Chat GPT? Exactly. Anyway, I got a bit distracted with that, right? Because um the reality really, I mean, I know you're making a joke, but the reality is that um a lot of what we do as developers, our our jobs are basically, I mean, there's a lot that AI can supplement us on. It's not to the point where it's going to replace us, right? Um, but it is to the point where um, if you're not using AI tools, you're not using all the tools out there that are available to you, um, and you're falling behind. Is the reality? Um, what's that? Server process.json. Okay. And so, checking out the different um, LLMs that are available, the different AI tools. The one that I haven't used a ton is Claude, and I hear very, very mixed results with Claude. Some people really, really like it. Some people really hate it. Um, when I used it, I found it to be a little bit heavy-handed. Um, it was really good in its suggestions, but I just found it to be very heavy-handed. Tell it to your NeoVim config. Hey, Michael Dev, welcome to the stream, man. Uh, Claude is your go-to. Yeah, I know a lot of people really like Claude, and I should probably take a look at Claude, um, but I haven't yet. Well, I have, but not seriously and in depth. I want to take a look at Gemini Code Gen. It's the new kid on the block. Um, it's also a Google. It's also a Google tool. We're encouraged to take a look at it as GDEs. So I want to give it a serious look, like I did. I mean, I've used this will be the third coding tool that we've used on the stream over the course of time, right? We started out with I can't even remember what it was called. It was the big competitor to Copilot early on. Then we switched over to Copilot because Copilot was just so much better. Um, Now Copilot's kind of falling behind. So I want to take a look at like Gemini CodeGen, and then we could take a look at Claude in the future, just see which tool we like better. Um, anyway, we just upgraded our Angular, so and once we get this done, and we're close, assuming I don't break anything. Which, according to Michael, every stream is a tooling stream when you come watch me. But it looks like we've got some Tailwind stuff to upgrade. Some ESLint, TS Jest. We'll skip Jest. I don't want to. Well, I don't know if we will. You know what? The rest of the stuff we can do here using the interactive stuff. And we're going to grab the types along with everything else. I'm not going to mess with the Playwright plugin or Express or Jest. But everything else should be okay for us to just upgrade. So go ahead and do that, and then serve. The last string of Gemini Firebase Studio streams with Devin and one of the Firebase members whose name is escaping me are really good. Also, with using linked signal and resource. Yeah, I need to go check out those streams. There have been some really, really good streams out there, and I need to keep up, right? So it's saying that I need to run approved builds. I don't think so. I think that's just what I was doing. Yeah, so it ran the oxide stuff and things like that. So let's go ahead and here we're gonna stage these, and we upgraded dependencies. And so far we aren't too out of it, right? Let's just make sure that everything serves. And actually close this window. So npm nx serve tour of npm exec nx serve tour of heroes. Hey Margaret, welcome to the stream. Thanks for hanging out with us. Yeah, I need to check out those streams. Exactly, that is an exact RxJS, an exact RxJS thought, right? So let's see. I think this is our tour of heroes. Let's bring up the console. There we go. So everything's serving right now. So we were able to connect. It hydrated 2 components for us. And if we change this, right, so we're in a position where things are working out. One thing that I have been doing is ignoring the styling here. We'll be cleaning up the styling. It's not good to ignore the styling, and we've got some weirdness going on, right? Like where this is highlighted and we're right up against the label. That's not cool. Making sure that this stuff looks good is something that we should definitely be taking care of. So we'll dig into that as we get deeper into the deeper into things. But after the upgrade, we're all in a good place. And let's promptly ignore what I just said and dive into what I kind of posted about on the on the announcement for the stream today. And that's looking at something that's new to NGRX Signal Store. They added in the eventing plug, the events, right? And they're letting us know that this is experimental, so it may change. But more than anything, I wanted to talk about this because there have been a couple of streams where we've either put together our own eventing framework, or we've needed an eventing framework and we didn't have it for the store. And if you guys look at this, you'll probably recognize this diagram. It's very, very similar to this diagram, right? It's very, very similar. If we look, it's almost the same diagram with the effect on the opposite side, right? So here's our effects, and we've got our reducers. We don't have selectors and actions and things like that. But if we go back to our signal store and we look at events, right, it got flipped around. But there's an important piece to this. And the important piece is to recognize that this is a unidirectional flow, right? And this is one of the things that I look for in a state management system. And for people, the old school developers like myself who've dealt with all sorts of different state management systems. If you guys have ever had to deal with like cascading drop downs, right? Or event storms, things like that, you recognize the importance of this unidirectional flow, right? There's only one way for something to create an event. There's only one way for the store to update data based on that event, and the store is what's driving the view, right? And then the view can dispatch more events. So we've got this unidirectional flow. There's no way for my view to mutate my store, right? We always want our view to go through some form of indirection to our store, and we always want the store to be driving the view. But as soon as you get multiple views driving a single store or things like that, you can wind up, you know what? I tested this out before. As soon as this starts happening, right? Now we've got this loop here. And so if the store updates and then we go into the view, right? And then the view is like, oh, I updated, I need to update the store. You guys have probably seen code like this before that gets into this weird state, right? Where you're just constantly running the circle. So what happens? Well, you add this next guard, right? So we add a guard here. Let's see. This is hard to do with the trackball, right? So we add a guard, right? And this guard is usually something like if initial view, blah, 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 or it's an RxJS something like skip 3, or right. You guys have seen this before, um, and this causes a mess here, right? And then our guard causes problems. So then our guard has to go into special logic, right? And this special logic then can either affect the guard, or it can affect the view, or it can affect the store. And suddenly we're in this spaghetti mess, right? Where our code is difficult to maintain. It's difficult for us to understand what's going on. We just got this huge mess. So whenever I'm evaluating any kind of state management solution, I'm looking for this single direction. As soon as there's anything more than a single direction way to move through it, I'm out. Right? I don't want to deal with it because I don't want to be back in those situations. Oh man, again. Let's go help out. Let's go help out the spammer. Guess what, dude? You earned yourself a permanent ban. Nobody wants to hear from you. Trackball in 2025. What would you use otherwise? Like I've been using trackballs for so long, and the reason I started using trackballs is I've been programming for so long that I got to this point where, like, if I would press here, I could feel like pins and needles shooting down my fingers, right? So I was getting close to like a carpal tunnel situation in both my hands. And so I moved to a trackball, and that situation's gone away. I also use split keyboards when I'm doing like professional work and stuff like that, so that my hands are at a more natural angle and things like that. And I think I was on the verge of getting carpal tunnel, and you know, so what split? What split? I'm using Kinesis Freestyle 2 for my Mac. So if I can, I don't know if you guys can see this. There we go. So this is the split keyboard I'm using. It allows me to set the angle independently on each side. It allows me to set, the keyboard as far apart as I want it to be. Let's throw that one out and get a real one. I have a corn and a lily and an iris. Wow. See, Kinesis was about as expensive as I wanted to go when I went to a split. I mean, I'll be honest with you guys. Split keyboards can get very, very expensive very, very fast. So Kinesis was about as far as I wanted to go. Yeah, exactly. They're not cheap. But I look at like tools that I'm using professionally as one, they're protecting my health, right? Like the cost of carpal tunnel surgeries and things like that, and all of that would have been way more than spending a little bit extra on a keyboard. And that, I guess that's one good thing to pass along to everybody, right? I've been programming professionally since 1998. And so, I'm going on 30 years. That's crazy. So 2028 will be 30 years of me professionally building code, right? So at some point, right, your body's just like, dude, all the abuse you've given me, guess what? You get to pay for it now. And right, like it starts, like for me, it started in my early 30s, where if I'd go play basketball with my friends, I'd wake up the next day and could barely move, right? you know, like the damage to my knees and to my heels. So I played a lot of roller hockey, and because of that, I've got injuries to my heels that show up every once in a while to where it becomes painful to even walk. Um, right, and it's just, you know, it's the stuff. It doesn't hurt when you're young, right? Your body heals fast, but that stuff all adds up and comes back to you. It's the same with programming, right? Um, Take some time to invest in, invest in the tools that are going to keep your body healthy. Um, they're going to save you more in the long run, right? Um, as your body decides, hey, I can't heal as fast anymore, right? Stuff like that. So check Twitter. You showed me something. Oh no, I heard my Twitter go off. Shared a photo with me, dude. Those are awesome. Those are like minimalist splits. Those are awesome. Look really, really cool. Um, Very cool. Anyway, we're a bit off topic. What I do want to tell you guys is another pain point that I've learned over my years and years of developing. Make sure that your state management solution makes sense, right? We don't want the spaghetti that we saw, when we drew everything out. Um, so if we look at this, there's some key pieces here: the events, the dispatcher, right, and then the store. It is going to contain reducers, and it is going to contain effects, right? And then our view is, where we plug in the store and show everything. Um, so there are some pieces to it, and we're going to take a look at this soon. But notice this is very much like NGRX store. And so I do want to be, and I did want to call this out too, right? Eventing is a higher level concept, and we're getting close to the Redux state management. So I'm not sure it belongs everywhere. Um, it definitely does belong in the store. We've run into some situations where having effects would have been a huge saver for us. For example, the Sudoku stuff that we threw away trying to make a resource for a Sudoku grid. If we had events in that, I don't think we would have failed. And so maybe it's time to try that again. Who knows? I want to. I had an interesting idea for linked signals and things like that. I want to start getting into, after we do Tour of Heroes, I want to start getting into like some tech demos to prove out some ideas before jumping full force into a game, right? So prove out some tech demos type things, right? Whenever you build a new game, you figure out the tech by writing tech demos that are just usually just dumb little things that prove that, hey, this works, right? Notice that when we set this up, our events, this is all coming from NGRX signals. So we aren't adding events and reducers and stuff, but we create these events, right? And these look very much like NGRX store events. This is how you create store events now in NGRX. And then inside of here, oh, they're still setting up events, right? And it is saying, right, you should use source and then the event name. This is just what they call good NGRX hygiene. We can even create event groups, and that's what I think we'll do, is we'll create an event group for our events. And then you can see they're using an event group here, and then you could create the events with their payload, right? And then the interesting part comes in with the store. You have to add the with reducer piece. So basically we are adding reducers, and And if you guys have ever worked with modern NGRX store, you'll recognize the on, right? So when this event happens, then, right, we do stuff here, right? Notice that this allows us to write the partial reducer for our state just right inside of it. We don't have to do anything special. So we can, we can look at these events, and then dispatching an event is pretty simple. Right, increment first. Oh, they're using so they're showing that we can use partial state reducers, right? Or partial state updaters in our reducers. So increment first, right, does this, increment second does this, and then increment both does this, right? So we can use partial updaters, which are an important part. The final thing is that actually using the side effects. So inside of here, we can see that, hey, we can launch our side effects, right? And one thing, before we had this side effect stuff, we were using what did we used an RxJS signal, right? And we were using the on and init functions to set up that not signal, RxJS observable, and we were using the on and init to set up that observable and to respond to when that observable emitted, right? With effects, we no longer need that. And this will also do away with the issues that we were having with like naming collisions and things like that. And right, we can get into reading state and stuff like that. So that's kind of the high level overview. So let's jump into how would we do this. So if we look at this, there's some key pieces here. When I'm ready to fight the heart and slay the spire. Oh man. I was getting ready for Slay the Spire 2, right? And you're pulling me way off topic here. But I went and did a Slay the Spire run. I am so out of it on Slay the Spire. I can barely play it. The builds that used to be infinite for me, I keep forgetting key pieces and things like that. So yeah. Hey, Johanderson, good to see you, man. Ole, is signal store events is always a singleton, same as global store? No, and that's the important part, Ole. It's not. So they're scoped to well, the events could be global. Let's say that, right? So you could have global events, but the reducers are not global. They're going to be scoped to the store, and we'll see that here, right? Because we're injecting the hero store provider into our heroes view. So let's go update our hero store. So right now we're using the update hero name, right, with a method. What if we wanted to create an event that, hero name changed, right? So let's take a look at that, right? So we'll create our event group. So our source is going to be well, let's work through it, right? We need source and events. And so here, what we can do is we can export const, and we're going to export our events, right? And it's going to be an event group. So we can say heroes state events equals, and here we can go event group, right? and grabs that from NGRX signals events. And so we need a couple of things here. What's interesting is I'm not seeing Gemini really be helpful yet. So we are seeing that, you know, we need a source. So let's go ahead and add our source, right? And our source, this will be, we'll call this our heroes UI source, right? And then we need our events, right? If we go take a look. So we need a source and events for this to work out. So our events are going to be, and right now the only event that we're going to have is our hero name changed, right? So hero name changed. And this is, right, it's trying to add stuff here. So interesting, right? But that's not what we're looking for. We need to define the shape of the event. So we're going to use the type function, and it's going to be type string, right? So here we're going to go type string, right? And did it pull in the type function? No, it didn't. Boom. So now we've got our hero name changed, right? The next thing we can do is, instead of using this method, and here we also want the hero name needs to be type or undefined, right? Because we want to match this updater here, right? So the next thing we can do is let's create a partial state updater, right? So one of the things down here that it talks about, right, is we can use these partial state updaters. And so, and it's going to return a value back, right? So let's create our partial state updater. So here we could say function update hero name, right? And here we're going to take in the hero name of the string, and this is going to return a partial state updater. And the shape of this partial state updater, we need the name, right? So we can say name : string, right? This is the shape that it's going to return. So our update hero name, oh, it's interesting. It's already picking some stuff up, right? Because I do want this. That piece up there is important, right? And this is actually going to make a bigger, this is going to make a bigger object, right? This create draft. Like, it's understanding that our draft is taking in stuff here, right? But if we take a look at our partial updaters, we just need to return an object that has that new value. That's it. So we'll return the state in the updater. And then the signal store will make sure to, so we need to return a function that takes state, right? And this is then going to return an object that is just name, right? So this is our partial updater. The nice thing about this is that it takes out the need for us to use any other library, right? We don't have to use we don't have to use mutative, right? This create function for mutative anymore. So we've encapsulated our logic for updating the hero name. So we can actually patch the state, and we can just say, hey, our patch state actually just needs the update hero name, right? And I actually think that's enough. Is that not enough? We don't need this anymore either. We can just pass in hero name. Oh, come on. Everything decided to freeze. There we go. It doesn't like my patch state. Partial state updater is not assignable to type or writable state source. We need state, comma, update hero name. Oh. There's a bit more to this, right? This actually has to return, and we don't know the shape of state, unfortunately. It just looks like state and name. If we go take a look, there was a reason we were doing. There's a reason we were doing it the way we were doing it, and did I not remove that? Oh, I haven't. Yes, I have saved it. What's going on here? Anyway, the way we were doing it is we were using state.hero, and our draft was setting the name. We're gonna have to do the same thing. So here we bring in the hero name, but here we need to return a hero of type hero, right? And boom. So here we still need to create our state.hero, and our draft is still going to draft.name equals name. Perfect. And it's probably not a signal at this point. And this is not returning because what is the return state here? Type hero has no properties in common with partial hero. So instead, we're going to go create state hero and then draft hero.name equals name. And that fixes all of that. I'm not sure that I really like this. Really not sure that I like this. It's part of the problem is we've got like this nested state, right? So our state has a hero that has an ID and a name on it. And so we have to go deeper into things like this, right? Let's just see if this works. And then we will get our we'll get this moved over to an event, right? So here we are, we're at Windstorm. If we change it over to like Michael, everything's working, right? Auradores, right? We can see that things have been changed, right? So we're still working. We've got our partial updater in place. This allows us to go to the next level, right? So now we can say, hey, we want reducers, right? So we're going to bring in our reducer. So here's our reducer. And the shape of the reducer, if we go back to our ngrx.io, right? So here, with effects, so our state changes require reducers, right? So when these things happen, we need to make something happen, right? With effects, creates these events that we can pass through, right? So load books by query, right? So we can add in these effects. We've got the events. Book service equals inject book service. So we can use RxJS to pipe stuff through and do side effects, right? We don't have the need to do side effects right now. We only need reducers. We'll take a look at side effects in the future, right? But side effects on our events allow us to do things like using queries and things like that, right? So we could have here we see that the events that they're using is either it's been opened or they've updated a query. So then, we get stuff through. We're not to that point yet. And reading state, we don't need selectors or anything like that, right? We can just inject the bookstore and everything works. Dispatching events. Inject dispatcher. So we do need to inject the dispatcher. So we'll take a look at the dispatcher. The dispatcher is what's going to allow us to call these events, right? But we need our reducer here. And our reducer is going to take the state. And I think that's how it works. Let's go And I haven't done this before, so we're going to, oh, it's with reducer, and then, okay. So we don't inject the state here. We just do with reducer, and we just say, hey, when, so we need to pull in the on event. And so now we're going to say on heroes state events dot hero name changed. Now we can use our update hero name, right? And what is the problem here? What did I do wrong? Oh, I need a function. I need a function. So we need to call it with hero name. There's a payload. There's a payload. That's what we need. So hero name changed. We can say hero name. And then we just return hero name, update hero name, hero name. Um, um, we're going to destructure this. We're going to say payload is hero name. And there we go. So now hero name is that, right? So now we've got our reducer that's going to make this happen. So to test this out, we can actually call, so we've got our reducer in place, right? Increment both. So there's our effects. This is reading state, but dispatching events. We need our dispatcher. So let's add our dispatcher here. So inside of here, we are going to need this. We can return this. But here we need const dispatcher equals inject dispatch. And the dispatch we're going to inject is our heroes state events, right? And then here, instead of update hero name, calling patch state, now we can just say, hey, we just want dispatcher dot dispatch, or nope, it's hero name changed. And here we just pass hero name. And there we go. So now we've got our event using, right? So we set up this event, right? Hero name changed. We really aren't even using state here anymore, so we don't even need that, right? We're just using a dispatcher. Our dispatcher is calling into a reducer. Our reducer is, calling into our partial state updater. And so we should be able to go back and take a look. And here, if we can see that, hey, we've got things going on, right? So we've been able to change this to use events, right? So if you see the inject dispatch function is a utility function to avoid the boilerplate code coming from the dispatcher and store combo, with the inject dispatch instead, the code is more readable because is dispatching the method in the events group. That's very helpful. Thank you, Wiseman Z. I appreciate the description there, and that is a very apt description, right? Using the inject dispatch, it's wrapping the events and giving us the direct ability to call into the function. So one last thing we can do, we've still got a bunch of boilerplate here, right? What if we could get rid of this boilerplate? And maybe it's not boilerplate, right? We're in an interesting case, right? Because if we go to our heroes view, right? And right now we're injecting the store, but what if we inject our dispatcher, right? Equals inject dispatch, right? And here we want the heroes state events. And I'll tell you right now that the Gemini code assist is pretty impressive on how fast it's coming up with good contextual. Like I haven't had to fight it nearly as much. But now we no longer need to we no longer need to call something on the store here. So now the store is only injected to update the template. And we're using a dispatcher to dispatch events to our signal store. So if we go back and we test things out, right, we'll add Wiseman, right? We can see that, hey, things are behaving the way we would expect them to. And we're dispatching events. Those events are being handled with reducers. And the other interesting thing is now we can make update hero name. Well, actually, we don't even need these methods, right? Yeah, like this with methods here is no longer needed. So now we're just down to our reducer, right? And if we go back here and we do Wiseman again, we can see that, hey, things are still working. But we've completely removed everything, and we can just, let's be super certain, right? Let's go ahead and shut everything down, right? Let's make sure that we don't have anything cached. We're going to shut everything down and restart the serve, right? So it's going to rebuild everything from scratch. It's going to start up our server. chunks, right, and our main chunks. Um, Look at our initial size. We're down under 60K because um, we're using we're using SSR, right, server side rendering. Um, but if we refresh this, it should have picked it up. So we see right now we're running in development mode. We hydrated 2 components, and if I can type, we can see, oh hey, we're in a good state. We're responding to events, and this is the importance of what we were talking about in the very beginning, right? This unidirectional flow gives us power, right? Because we can set up dispatchers for events, right? Like if our hero's view didn't have any need for the hero store in it, like say we wanted to update something else, how Joshua Maroney measures bundles. Yeah, Josh he is impressive. You guys should check out his YouTube channel. Like I go down the Joshua Maroney rabbit hole about, I would say, once a week, once every 2 weeks or something. He is doing stuff with Angular that is like next tier right now with his gaming streams, and just he gets like these ideas and it just goes and builds these things that are impressive, but keeping your bundle sizes small, right? Is an important part of just like um, modern web development, right? If we take a look at our network, um, we're we're finishing our loading in under 2 seconds. Our DOM content is 1.5 seconds. Like we could probably do better if let's try refreshing. Yeah, so with our caching now in place, we're actually not too bad. Oh no, I've got caching disabled. So without our caching, we're around 0.5 seconds to load. Um, right? Yeah, so we're right around 0.5 seconds, which is impressive, um, especially for like an Angular application, right? And we're getting chunks so fast. But the initial view, if we look at this initial view, um, we can see this is the client. So this is our initial load. This is our initial stuff that happens, and we already get the ID and we already get windstorm, right? So Angular's already pre-computed this. Yeah, the backrooms was awesome. Um, yes, Wiseman Z. I absolutely 100% agree with what you just said, right? By the way, my opinion using this events plugin implements the same boilerplate coming from the global store. I know that in some cases it's better to have events linking 2 or more stores, but for simple cases, I prefer 100%. And that's something that we definitely called out in the beginning, right? Is that we're getting closer to the Redux pattern, and you probably don't need the Redux pattern, right? Um, there have been cases where us needing events has been important, but even then I would contend that those events that we needed could have existed entirely in the store. um, so the changes we've made today aren't necessarily changes that um, you know that I would suggest. This is me walking through, if you needed to add events, how would you do it, right? Like the step by step. First of all, we would create the partial updater, right? And then we would get our code working with a partial updater, right? Instead of inline code. Once that works, then the next step is to add the events and the reducer, and then get the dispatcher happening, right? Um, inside of our method. And then once that dispatcher is there, we can remove that and move the dispatch to the component, right? And you guys saw a little bit of my thinking happening there, and maybe I could have been more explicit about it. The one thing that bothers me here is that to use this dispatcher, I have to inject dispatch everywhere, right? And I do agree with Wise Man Z, right? Wise Man Z, whichever one you prefer. But the need to do this pushes us closer and closer to Redux land. There's nothing wrong with Redux. I want to be 100% clear here. There's nothing wrong with Redux. The thing about Redux is that you probably don't need it. And the other thing I do want to call out is that, you know, I spent a bunch of time talking about the unidirectional flow. Without the dispatcher and the events, we've still got a unidirectional flow, right? You use updaters still in your code, right? So it doesn't come back to this if we take out events, right? We don't wind up with something like this. It actually winds up being something more like, we come down here and these are our updater methods, right? And then our updater methods call into the state, right? You can't directly affect, wow, that is hideous. You can't directly affect the store from a view, right? We don't do this. And this is the piece that's going to lock us into like update storms and things like that, right? That we don't want. Having this unidirectional flow where everything has to go through an update method, everything has to go through, right, certain things. This is the important piece, right? The events, this is Redux basically. Because we also get side effects, we get reducers, right? Our events are basically our actions, right? This is definitely the Redux pattern, right? Be very, very careful about implementing Redux patterns. And it's not because Redux is bad, it's because you usually don't need Redux, right? You usually don't need that level. It's very similar to, like, I like a lot of pieces of domain-driven design, DDD, right? I don't recommend that you go full DDD on every project. It's just way too much, right? Way more than you need. It's the same thing with Redux, right? You can bring in concepts and pieces of Redux that are very, very good to have in every application, but you don't need full Redux, right? In every application. It's just way too much, and it increases the difficulty. That's kind of the analogy that I would make, right? Be very judicious in choosing what you want to bring into your project, especially because we've proven that if we want to go the full Redux route, it's not that difficult to get there, right? And that's part of what I wanted to talk about is, you know, we're going through this thing at work right now where we're evaluating a bunch of state management libraries, right? NGRX has a bad name with a lot of people. And the reason that NGRX has a bad name with a lot of people is not because of Signal Store, is not because of Component Store, and I would argue it's not because of NGRX Store. Those are all good pieces of technology. NGRX Store was, you know, kind of synonymous with NGRX for a long time. everybody thought it was a silver bullet to solving state. And I did this too when it first came out. I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then we built these bloated, massive action reducer side effect monstrosities that became more and more difficult to maintain, right? And it became a mess. And because people did NGRX poorly, and I'm one of them that did NGRX poorly, NGRX got a bad name, right? And so now when you talk to people about NGRX, oh, we hate NGRX, you shouldn't use NGRX for anything. Wrong. NGRX implemented Redux very well, and the Redux pattern is useful, right? Modern NGRX is way better. But more than that, Signal Store is not NGRX Store, right? There are pieces being added to it that are moving it closer to that direction. And will so like there were times where using NGRX and NGRX Store could become a necessity. By adding this event system, they remove that, right? There's reasons for events. It's not just because, oh, we know this really well, we should add it. There's reasons that they're adding it. So all of this is to say, be very judicious in what you introduce to your application, because once you introduce something to your application, it's very difficult to get rid of it. And it can become very easy for people to abuse that, right? So it's bad because of global store. The global store is part of it, right? The global store is basically turning everything in state into a global variable, and it became difficult to clean that up. That is part of it. The other part of it is that people were using actions and reducers to do things that they shouldn't have been doing, that, right? Or they were creating actions that were doing 2 or 3 things, and it just became very, very difficult to understand what was causing your state to update, and to debug state, and to debug state transitions and things like that. It just became a big mess because people were not listening to the advice in the NGRX Store documentation, not listening to the advice that like Brandon Roberts and Mike Ryan were giving in talks, right? And in fact, I was part of a talk where I was sitting in the audience, and Brandon Roberts and Mike Ryan were up there saying, you probably don't need NGRX, right? Before the rest of the community even caught up. And the reality is, once you introduce reducers, you introduce a level of you've got to be very disciplined with your code, right? Because you introduced a level of discipline that needs to be followed for actions, a level of discipline that needs to be followed for reducers, a level of discipline that needs to be followed for side effects, right? All of those things introduce more discipline to your code. The other thing that they do is any abstraction, by its very nature, is going to increase cognitive overhead, right? So the easiest way in code to do things, right, is just to call functions, right? That's the easiest way. That's the way we're taught, very, very early on when we learn to code, is you just call functions. Calling functions leads to spaghetti code, right? So how do we reduce spaghetti? Well, we introduce concepts like encapsulation, right? Encapsulation introduced concepts like objects, right? Those all have cognitive overhead because now we have to start worrying about private, protected, friend, public, right? There's overhead to that. And then, right, then we start getting into inheritance schemas and things like that, right? There's necessary cognitive overhead, but it reduces spaghetti code, right? So the trade-off is worth it, right? The added cognitive overhead is worth the trade-off, right? It's the same with NGRX Store, right? The global state is not necessarily a bad thing, but right? Global anything can lead to abuse, and that was one of the big things, right? Like people were abusing the global store because it was available everywhere, causing the same problems that like global variables cause, right? People weren't being people weren't being disciplined, right? They weren't following the same patterns. There was it was just creating a mess, and the cognitive overhead of that was not paying off as much, right? Because the need for Redux in smaller applications really wasn't there. And that's what led to everybody hating Redux and saying, "Oh, it's slow and blah blah blah." It takes time to develop, right? All of these things that people say, right? Boilerplate, right? The famous Brandon Roberts talk, where if you say boilerplate, he's going to ban you on Twitter. I probably should have been banned by Brandon quite a few times because I say boilerplate a lot. Um, but the reality is there was that overhead that was needed, right? People were calling it boilerplate. It was necessary for the abstraction. And that's right. Like, as good engineers, we need to be able to evaluate the abstraction and say, is the cost of this abstraction enough to overcome what we're trying to overcome, right? Like, is the cost of us adopting this going to be worth it, right? Are we going to get more out of it than we pay into it? And a lot of times that evaluation is difficult to make. That's where I argue that for modern engineers, your value comes from. Your value doesn't come from writing code, right? Because we've even seen it now, right? Where I'm pleasantly surprised with the suggestions that Gemini is coming up with, right? Those suggestions were really good, really spot on, and I was happy with them. Our code developing tools are going to get better and better and better. At some point, we're probably not going to be able to compete as humans with those tools for what they do well now, right? They're going to be able to have the context of the entire code base and things like that, right? They aren't going to get tired like we do, right? Like maybe you had a late night, or maybe there was an emergency or something, or maybe something's going on and you can't give your full attention. AIs don't have that problem, right? So they're just going to keep getting better and better and better, and a lot of the human issues that come in are going to those gaps are going to get bigger and bigger, right? Which sounds pretty bleak, but it's not as bleak as everybody wants you to think, right? Like, oh, coders will disappear in 5 years. That's bullshit. Coders won't disappear in 5 years. What will disappear is coders who only write code, right? We need to evolve into engineers, and engineers evaluate the impact of code. They evaluate the cost of owning that code. They evaluate other things, right? The code isn't their job anymore, right? Like, that used to be a large portion of our job, but the tooling can do a lot of it. Our job is to decide, did the tooling do a good job? A large portion of the time right now, the tooling's job is maybe it did an okay job, but we could do better, right? In the future, I think it's going to get to a point where it's going to be very, very difficult for humans to be like, I could do better. That's where I think we're going with code generation tools. Where I don't think AI will hit in 5 years is understanding the trade-offs and the complexities of what they're doing, right? Gen AI just doesn't have that capability yet. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, who knows? But until it does, our value is in making those decisions. During the years, I passed from wow, the Redux pattern is a must for every project, to I hate Redux pattern for putting so much boilerplate. Right now, the only point in favor of Redux is because the juniors cannot implement monstrosity and follow a certain pattern. I get you, Wise Man Z. And your sentiments are echoed by a lot of people, right? And it's even in the React, right? Because Redux came into Angular from the React ecosystem. And React rejected Redux faster than Angular did, um, mainly because Angular's, a little bit slower to move. But your sentiments are very similar across the board. To me, the Redux pattern makes sense, because it's a very event driven pattern, right? It's another observer pattern. And if we look at the stuff that's being added into Angular, we're adding a bunch of observer patterns, right? Um, we've had the RxJS observables forever. That's the observer pattern on kind of, we could say on steroids, right? It's the observer pattern doing observer pattern very, very well, right? It's an event driven pattern. Signals are another event driven pattern. The difference being that with RxJS, there's a time component, right? We know when things happen and things happen in an order. With signals, we remove that time component. And that's the big difference here. And the reason that we want signals, is the user doesn't care about the time component, right? It's often the side effects or things in the internals of the program that care about the time component. So the closer we get to like the API layer or the event generation layer or whatever, we want to be closer to RxJS and observables. The closer we get to the user, we want to be closer to signals, right? And there's transitional pieces in there, right, where we transition from RxJS to signals or signals to RxJS, right? And there are people out there trying to debounce signals. But what debouncing signals actually does is it introduces a time piece into your signals. Signals don't need time, right? They shouldn't have a concept of time. That's where observables win. And, the Redux pattern is another observer pattern, right? The thing about Redux is that it's unidirectional, which I love, right? Most any pattern that is event driven is really just the observer pattern. And right, you're observing events, reacting to those events, and causing things to happen based on events, right? That's Redux, right? Redux was just another observer pattern. It made the observer pattern more predictable, and it added some complexity to it, right? The abstraction. That complexity was often way more than people needed to pay for the applications they were writing. I don't disagree with your sentiment, Wise Man Z. I am of the case, and I actually debated even doing this. I've been fighting with myself back and forth. I wanted to show that we could move to events. I don't think that Tour of Heroes needs events, right? And so going forward, we're not going to be creating more. I did want to show that if we need to get more complicated, it's very, very easy if we make the right choices early on to move to something like, a Redux pattern, to move to something like XState, right? Using contracts for our finite state machines, right? One thing to recognize, and this has been something that hit me recently. It probably seems obvious to you guys, right? But I'm slower, right? I'm slower than most of you guys, and it takes a long time for me to think things through. But anytime we talk about state management, we're already in a finite state machine land, right? As soon as we start talking about state, what we've really done is we've cut off the finite, right, and the machine, right? We're talking about state, we've shortened it, right? But we are talking about finite state machines, right? And so once we're talking about finite state machines, now we're talking about state transitions, right? And if we want to talk about state transitions like, form validity, errors from API responses, transitioning based on user input, button clicks or things like that, right? State transitions, right? So we're, and then what do we want to do in state transitions? Well, if our form's in an error state, we don't want it to submit, right? And maybe the cancel button doesn't clear the form, but it puts us back to the previous state before we put it into an error state, right? And so right now we're talking about transitioning to an error state and how we transition out of the error state. And right, we've got we're finite state machines, right? Something like X state is a way for us to define those to formally define those states and state transitions, right? Which is why I really like X state. But it's not as popular as a lot of other things in the Angular area. But I would love to see that change, because anytime we talk about state or state management, we're talking about finite state machines. And so how do we go from simple state management with simple state transitions to a more formalized state transition, right? And that's what Redux is. Redux is a more formalized state transition. It's a more formalized state. It's a more formalized state machine pattern, right? Because actions are what cause the transitions. Reducers are what react to those actions, and then based on the state and things like that, we can control which actions we respond to and things like, right? It's a very formalized state management. It's a very formalized finite state machine pattern, right? We can go even more formalized and go into X state where we actually define everything, right? So yeah, I do agree with you. NGRX Monster is much better than custom RxJS store solution. Ole, very, very wise words. This is my hot take. And as soon as you tell me that you don't need a framework and you can do everything in vanilla JS or whatever, basically that tells me that you've got your own framework that you use, and you expect everybody to conform to your framework rather than conforming yourself to the frameworks that everybody else understands, right? Anytime somebody tells me that they want to use vanilla JS, I'm going to go look at their code, and they're going to have ways that they do certain things, right? And they do it in every project where they do vanilla JS, right? Very, very wise, because if we use frameworks like React and Angular and Vue, right, the big three right now, people understand how to do things in React, right? The majority of people understand how to do things in React. A large number of people understand how to do things in Angular, and Angular is becoming more popular, right? A large people understand how to do things in Vue, and I have a couple of Angular friends who really like Vue better than Angular, and are thinking about moving that direction. The benefit is that we can bring people on board faster, right? There's always an onboarding process regardless, but a lot of the language is already there. Once you start implementing your own thing and going down your own implementations, you increase that cost of bringing new people on. But more than that, you're slowly separating those people from the mainstream. And so it becomes more difficult, right? Like, here's the mainstream frameworks, right? And you hire devs and you peel them off, and the more they work with your framework, the further away they are. But at some point, as the mainstream just continues on, they've got to merge back in, right? The cost of this merge is what you're expecting them to pay. And it may not even be a curve like this, right? It could be an exponential curve where they just get further and further away. And so the cost that you're pushing onto them to get back into mainstream dev so that they can find a job in the future, or so that they can help out other developers, can become expensive, right? Just depending on the cost of this curve, right? This is an e to the x type curve, right? This is an exponential curve. Well, no, this is an e to x. This is a log x, right? But right, you can definitely hurt people by the choices you make, especially as you get higher and higher into an organization, um, and you get more and more power to make decisions. You can be damaging the people that come work for your organization. And this is where, right, like early on in your career, it's good to be opinionated, right? It's good to care about React versus Angular versus Vue. I encourage it wholeheartedly to participate in those debates and things like that. You need to develop those strong core principles, right? um, as you mature in your career, it's less important to be participating in those passion things and start thinking deeply about what is the cost of what I'm talking about, right? Um, it's okay to maintain some of that passion, but if your passion is costing people, right? If you're digging people into these holes, right? And it's harder and harder for them to climb out, right? The further we take them away from the mainstream, the more difficult it is for them to communicate with their peers, the more difficult it is for them to understand their peers, right? There's something to be said about sticking close to the mainstream. Um, so Ole, your comment is very, very apt in that, right? Sticking close to something that everybody understands is almost always better than going off on your own, right? You could probably point to performance. You could probably point to a whole bunch of other things, and if that is if that is the problem you're trying to solve, performance or whatever else, then by all means, right? Um, but if the thing you're trying to solve is I hate NGRX, um, that's not good enough to be digging people into these holes, right? It's perfectly fine for you to dig yourself into a hole, but once you start bringing others along, the cost of your decisions is not just you. Um, and like morally, as an engineer, you need to realize that the costs of your decisions don't affect just you; they affect everybody else who comes along and works on the stuff that you're working on. And as you get more and more power to make more and more decisions, your ability to dig people into these holes and the number of people you can dig into these holes becomes bigger and bigger, right? um, so just be very, very careful about attacking the mainstream patterns. It's okay to critique mainstream patterns. I don't want to encourage everybody to be like, oh, just follow along with mainstream. No, you should be critiquing, you should be thinking through. And that's why in software development things change so quickly, is that people are thinking critically about it. What isn't okay is for me to attack something because I don't like it or don't understand it, and to dig people into these holes, right? Hopefully that makes sense. But I do really like your comment about sometimes the enemy we know is better than the unknown, right? Sometimes it's better to just hold your nose and swallow the medicine than it is to go out and try and create our own medicine and kill a bunch of people, right? To extend that metaphor just a little bit, um, right? And it's I don't know. It's always a little bit, as a content creator, I want to be responsible about the stuff that I expose you guys to, but I do think it's also important to understand that there are ways to do things out there, right? I also recognize in myself that I'm very much an ooh shiny type person, right? Um, every organization needs two types of people to keep the organization healthy, right? And it's not right. It's not a binary system, right? There's these two extremes, right? And at this end of the extreme is where I tend to sit, right, with the ooh shiny, right? And over here is this we can call more like the conservative approach, right? Like we'll conserve, right? Right. And these aren't bad positions to be at, right? But if your entire organization is over here and ooh shiny, you never release, right? And the reason you never release is that you get like 80% of the way to releasing. And then the next shiny thing comes along, we throw everything away and we move to the next shiny thing, right? Um, we're like the dog in Up, right? We're squirrel, right? And suddenly we're off to the races, trying to build the next new shiny thing because shiny is awesome, right? The opposite extreme is the people who want to conserve, and I probably need a better name for this because conservatives and stuff like that get a bad name based on the political landscape. But this is like classical conservatism, meaning that um, people on this extreme are this works, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, is this extreme, right? Don't mess with it. It works. Don't mess with it, right? And these people are amazing and good for the organization. But if everybody's here, as soon as a disruptive piece of technology comes along, it's very, very difficult for them to move out of where they are, and they tend to get further and further away from that disruptive piece until they're no longer relevant, right? And so I don't know anybody who's at the extreme, right? Everybody exists somewhere in this scale, right? Um, because there's nobody who's 100% conservative, and there's nobody who's 100% ooh shiny, right? I would put myself, more in this area where there's a lot of stuff that I don't want to touch, but there is a lot of stuff that I do, right? And I know a lot of people who are here who are like, hey, there's this cool new tech, but who cares? Our stuff works, right? And maybe we'll introduce some cool new stuff, right? The important thing to recognize um, is that we've often got like a pendulum swinging between these two extremes, right? Um, and the problem with pendulum swings is that when we're over here, if we get too far over here, something's going to cause us to need to move this direction, right? And the force of that can often cause us to swing way too far over here, right? Like a full rewrite or who knows what, right? And then everybody's like, rewrite sucks. So then we swing way back over here and we stay over here. Really, we probably want to be swinging, back and forth, maybe between these two marks or, depending on your organization, maybe between here, maybe who knows where the pendulum swing needs to be. And as engineers, our goal is to minimize the effects of these swings, right? If you think about like the classic wrecking crane from like cartoons, right? The bigger the swing, the more we're going to destroy. If we can keep the swing smaller, it's likely that we disrupt less. And so, yeah. Michael says, I'm on the center. I have a lot of weird ideas and new tools, but on the end, I want to use solutions I know and it worked before. And you know what, Michael? You're probably the kind of person we need a ton of, right? But at any organization, we need both types, right? We need the shiny and we need the conserve. It's very, very rare to find people in the exact center, right? Everybody's on the scale somewhere. But we need both of these types to keep the organization healthy, right? We need and they need to be balanced, right? The conservatives need to be able to hold back the shiny people. The shiny people need to be able to pull the conservatives, right? And that's what keeps the organization healthy, right? And there's healthy tension in every organization, right? There's always going to be tension, right? Because these guys want to pull this way, right? and these guys want to pull this way, right? And this tension is healthy, right? It keeps the organization healthy, because if we get an equal balance of pull, then we tend to stay closer to the center, like you like to be, Michael, right? Um, if these guys become too strong, then we move this way, right? And we move closer and closer to not releasing. If these guys become too strong, then we move this way and we move closer and closer to, hey, we aren't innovating fast enough. Our competitors are beating us. Who knows, right? Things like that. So there's a healthy tension, and this is always going to move back and forth. You know, we can't perfectly balance everything, right? Because it's the reality. We're humans, right? There's no perfect balance. Um, anyway, um, you know, I recently added coding philosopher to my bio, because these are the things that I think about more and more as I look at code. I've seen a lot of different ways of writing code. I've seen the circular patterns that we follow over and over again. I'm now to the point of, why do we do that, and how do we minimize the impact of us chasing our tails in the great circular pattern, right? The great Ouroboros, as we consume our own tail. Yeah, building well balanced teams is hard. I think hiring people don't care about it much, character traits, et cetera, et cetera. And you're 100% correct. And here's the scary thing about that, right? Like, AI is being used to weed people out, and AI has been shown to have biases in the hiring process. And so people who are good hires are being weeded out by AI because um, they may not know the keywords to trigger AI, right? And so people who are out there that are playing the game and triggering AI are getting hired, but that tends to skew your hires, right? Because of various reasons, right? But the better hires are not happening. And here's the ugly reality of hiring people. Um, the more charismatic you are, the more you get people in the hiring process to like you, the more likely you are to get the job. It doesn't really come down to your skill with the job. Sometimes it does, right? Um, but a lot of times it really comes down to your charisma and your ability to get the hiring people on your side, um, which is human nature, right? Um, we're social beings, right? We want to follow along with the group. We want to be a part of the group, and hiring is just a mess. Even under the best of situations, I would argue that you're still rolling the dice. Um, and the people that tell you that their hiring solution is the best are people who are selling their hiring solution, right? The people who are going to be honest about hiring um, are the people actually doing hiring. And most of the people who have done a lot of hiring will tell you it's a crapshoot, um, right? So, to your point, Michael, um, whenever I am evaluating a hire or things like that, I'm looking at character traits. I'm looking at team fit. I'm looking at things like that, um, because those are the hardest pieces to fit, right? You don't need to be a great developer. You just need to be an expert in interviews. Hardest thing in IT, absolutely 100%. And I'm not an expert in interviews, even though I was a person whose main who had a responsibility to review interviews and make sure that interviews were being done fairly and conducted fairly. Even though that was my job, my skill at interviewing is, I would put it below average. I I don't know. It's something that you have to practice. And in today's economy and market globally, and I do talk to a lot of people globally, um, interviewing skills are a huge must. Um, I saw a recent study based out of the US that most people who are in the job market right now can expect to go through 200 to 300 resumes, um, putting 200 to 300 resumes out there before they'll find their next position. And on average, that's taking about 6 months. Um, so, the U.S. The U.S. trend, I'm seeing that in other places. Um, the global economy and the global market and the global job search, AI has really made a mess of it. And there are a whole bunch of studies about how hiring managers are sitting on things because they want to feed a bunch of people through AI, right? So in the past, you would get 3 or 4 resumes, um, and then you would act on those resumes and things like that. Now we've got hiring managers that will sit on resumes until they've collected, like, 20, 30, 40, 100, 200 resumes, and feed those all through AI, right? Um, and um, however long it takes for that to happen, the hiring managers don't care because they've got jobs, right? The people that are doing the job searches um, are struggling, and I saw this myself as I was looking for a job. What was crazy is it would go in waves. So I would send out resumes, right? And I would contact people and things like that. And then it would go silent for like a month at a time, 6 weeks at a time. And then suddenly everybody's trying to talk to me, right? The crazy thing is I put out resumes to a bunch of places. Um, and um, as soon as I signed my offer letter with my current employer, and I do have to be careful about. You guys can go look it up on LinkedIn, but I don't speak for my current employer, right? I have to be careful about what I say about my current employer. But as soon as I signed my current offer letter with my current employer, a week later, like, some of the other places that I applied to are like, hey, let's schedule an interview. Hey, let's talk. Hey, we're really interested in you. Let's talk. And to this day, I've still got a company, and I don't even know how to stop them sending these things to me. They keep sending me emails like, hey, you haven't set up your interview time. Hey, you haven't done this. You haven't done this. I've tried to email them. I've tried to stop it. When I email to the email address and say, hey, I've accepted a position, my emails bounce back. And they send me an email saying, don't respond to this email. It's like, I don't know how to contact you guys and tell you that I'm not ghosting you, but here I am. I get about 2 emails like that per week from this organization saying, hey, you haven't sent in your information. Hey, you haven't scheduled your interview. Hey, we're really interested in you, right? And that's one of the big problems we've got right now, and that's a global problem, right? Where hiring managers want to feed a certain amount into the AI, right? And they're being instructed that the AI works better with larger samples and blah blah blah, right? Who cares? Really, all it does is it just takes people's time and increases anxiety, and it makes people more likely to not look at you because you're taking too much, right? Um, anyway, very distracted on that part. But yeah, we made it through. We made it through the code early, so we actually made it through code today. I will tell you guys, I'm very impressed with Gemini Code Assist. Um, I am liking it better than Copilot. I do want to do more with it so that I can understand better. If it's just if it's just a bit of the placebo effect, right? Like, where, oh, I switched and now I'm like, oh, that's really cool, and I'm not recognizing that, oh, I've been on Copilot and Copilot's been doing that for a while. So I want to keep working with Code Assist for a while and make sure that I still feel this way in a bit. I think I'm going to end here. We'll pick up next time and move forward with the Tour of Hero stuff. Um, yeah, Copilot is the worst. Everything is better now. Yeah, and that so that's going back to the shiny versus this the shiny versus what do we call it? I don't want to say conservative because I don't want the negative connotation. Like I don't want either side to have a negative connotation, but the if it ain't broke people, right? The shiny versus the if it ain't broke, and I don't know how that translates internationally, but in the U.S. there's a saying that's very very common. That's if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like if something's working, don't mess with it. Let it work, right? Um, so the shiny versus the if it ain't broke people, right? With my AI tools, I tend to be more towards the if it ain't broke side. Um, yeah, Copilot was just first. Um, yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And I'm sure they're trying to make innovations. Um, I don't know. I just I struggle with it. Um, yeah, thank you guys for being here. Thank you everybody for hanging out. Thank you very much for all the good comments. And hopefully we shared some stuff that's helpful for you. We'll be definitely digging into code more. I keep saying I'm going to do a stream in the middle of the week. I'll figure it out. I Things are still a little bit crazy right now as I'm just trying to figure out how I fit with my job and things like that. So for right now, plan on Sunday streams, assuming no holidays are overlapping them. And then we'll work in some more streams as I figure out like trains and work schedules and things like that. But for right now, I want to be very focused on my job, especially with the way the economy is right now. I don't I want to make sure that I'm doing that, but I also want to make sure that I'm providing good content for all of you. But everybody, you guys have a great rest of your weekend. We will see you next Sunday, same time.